There is a world that wakes up when we go to sleep. It exists in the hallways of our empty offices, in the silent cafeterias of our schools, and down the long, sterile corridors of our hospitals. It's a world of echoing footsteps, of humming fluorescent lights, and of profound, deep silence. This is the world of the night shift custodian, the lone watchmen who clean up the messes of the day and prepare the world for the next one. They are used to the quiet. They are comfortable with the solitude. But sometimes, in the dead of night, the silence is broken. Sometimes they discover they are not as alone as they think. If you enjoy stories from the shadows, from the quiet hours when anything seems possible, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. It helps us find more tales to share with you. Now turn down the lights. Our first story isn't about a ghost or a phantom. It's about a simple knock on a door and a danger that was all too real. Purple Phantom Shorts. His name is not important, but his job was. For years, he worked as a night custodian at a small elementary school. It was a good job. Quiet. Predictable. He knew the building like the back of his hand. He knew the groan the boiler made at 2 a.m., the way the wind would whistle through a crack in the window frame of the third-grade classroom, and the exact spot on the gym floor that always squeaked. He was a man who understood the building's language. His shift was a lonely one, from late afternoon until just after midnight. He'd watch the teachers and the last of the students leave, their laughter and energy fading into the evening. Then the building would become his. The colorful drawings of animals and rainbows taped to the walls seemed to watch him as he pushed his cart of supplies, their cheerful smiles looking a little different in the dim, artificial light. One night, during a cold autumn week, he was finishing his duties. It was around 11 p.m. The world outside was pitch black and silent. He was in the main office emptying the last of the trash cans when he heard it. A soft sound. Tap, tap, tap. It came from a side door, one that led to a small staff parking lot. It wasn't a door that was ever used this late. He froze, his hand hovering over a bin of shredded paper. He listened. The building settled around him with its usual groans. He must have imagined it. He went back to his work, tying the bag. Tap, 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 tap. There it was again. Clearer this time, more insistent. A chill, completely separate from the autumn air, crawled up his spine. Who on earth would be knocking on the door of a locked elementary school at 11 o'clock at night? His mind raced. A parent who forgot something? A police officer doing a check? He walked slowly towards the door. It had a small, reinforced window in it, but he was too nervous to put his face right up to the glass. Instead, he called out, his voice sounding loud in the empty building. "Who is it?" a small, timid voice replied. A child's voice. "Hello, can I have a drink of water?" The janitor's heart, which had been hammering with suspicion, now sank with concern. A child? Out here? Alone? He immediately felt a pang of guilt for his hesitation. He moved to the door and peered through the little window. Standing on the doorstep was a small child, no older than 7 or 8. The kid was shivering slightly, looking up at the door with wide, pleading eyes. The janitor's mind was a whirlwind. Where were his parents? Did he wander off from a nearby house? Every instinct of a decent human being told him to swing the door open, bring the poor kid inside, and call the police. He put his hand on the cold metal knob, but something stopped him. A feeling. It was a deep, primal sense of wrongness. The kind of feeling you get right before a car accident, or when you're walking in the woods and realize the birds have gone completely silent. The school was not in a busy residential area. The closest homes were a good distance away, across a dark field. How would a child this young get here alone? And why knock on the door of a dark school for a drink of water? He fought against his gut feeling. This was a child in need. But the feeling just got stronger. It was a cold dread that settled deep in his stomach. With his hand still on the knob, he made a decision. It felt cruel. It felt wrong. but his gut was screaming at him. Through the door, he said, his voice firm. "No, I can't open the door." The child's face fell. The pleading look was gone, replaced by a blank, empty expression that was far more chilling. The kid didn't cry, didn't ask again, just turned around and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the parking lot. The janitor stood there for a long moment, his heart pounding, consumed by a terrible mix of fear and guilt. What if he was wrong? What if that child was truly in trouble? He couldn't live with that. He had to know. He bolted from the door, running down the hall to the nearest classroom. It had a large window that looked out over that same parking lot. He flicked off the classroom lights so he wouldn't be seen and crept to the window, peering out into the night. And what he saw made his blood run cold. The child was there, walking across the asphalt. But he wasn't alone anymore. As the child reached the edge of the lot, near a line of trees, 2 tall, adult figures stepped out of the shadows to meet him. He couldn't make out their faces, but he could see their shapes, their postures. They hadn't been there a minute ago. They had been waiting, hiding, just out of sight of the door. They hadn't been waiting for the child. They had been waiting for the janitor. They had been waiting for him to open the door. The child was just the bait. He watched as the 3 figures, the 2 tall shapes and the 1 small one, walked together and vanished completely into the darkness of the trees. He never knew what they wanted. Maybe it was to rob the school, or maybe it was something much, much worse. He only knew one thing for certain. His gut feeling, that cold, illogical dread, had just saved his life. He never reported it. Who would believe him? But he never again walked to a door at night without that memory replaying in his mind, the memory of a small, pleading face and the shadows that were waiting just beyond the light. From a danger that was all too human, we now journey into the unsettling territory of the unknown, a place where your own senses can't be trusted, and where the one thing you should be able to rely on is the very thing you should begin to fear. This story comes from a janitor who cleaned a building where the air itself felt heavy, with something ancient and aware. He was a young man, taking a night job to make ends meet. The building was a mix of corporate offices and small medical labs. It was modern, clean, and after 9 p.m. completely empty, or it was supposed to be. From his very first shift, he felt it. It was a specific hallway on the 3rd floor. The moment he stepped into it, the atmosphere changed. He described the air as feeling thick, heavy with a static charge of dread. It wasn't cold or hot, just oppressive. Like walking into a room moments after a terrible argument has ended, but the feeling had been left there to curdle for years. He mentioned it to another cleaner, who just nodded grimly and said, "Yeah, we know. Just do your work fast in that one." For months, that's what he did. He'd hold his breath, push his buffer down the long linoleum floor, and get out as quickly as possible. The feeling was always there, a silent pressure on his skin, but nothing ever happened, until one night. He was tired. It was late, around 2 a.m., and he was working his way down the dreaded 3rd floor hallway. The floor-to-ceiling windows on one side reflected the hallway perfectly, creating a mirror image of the empty offices and the long corridor stretching into darkness. He could see his own reflection clearly under the fluorescent lights as he worked, pushing the heavy buffing machine back and forth. He glanced up and noticed something odd. In the reflection, something was out of place. He stopped, looking intently at his own image in the dark glass. Behind his reflection, there was another shape. It was vague, like a shadow, but it was darker than the other shadows in the room. It was tall and thin. He blinked, and it was gone. He shook his head. "Too much coffee," he muttered to himself, his heart beating just a little faster. It was a trick of the light, the reflection of a coat rack in one of the offices, that's all. He went back to work, his eyes now nervously flicking up at the glass every few seconds. And then he saw it again. This time, it was clearer. It was a dark figure, standing right behind his reflection. And it moved. As he pushed the buffer forward, the dark shape behind him seemed to drift slowly to the left. He froze. The shape stopped moving. He took a hesitant step back. In the glass, the shadow figure behind him also took a step back. But it seemed slow, laggy, like a bad video connection. A wave of pure terror washed over him. He wanted to spin around, to face whatever was standing behind him, but he was paralyzed. He couldn't do it. He was terrified of what he would see, or worse, what he wouldn't see. What if there was nothing there? What did that mean for his sanity? With trembling hands, he began to move again, forcing himself to continue his work, to pretend he hadn't seen anything. He decided to test it. He raised his right hand slowly. He watched the reflection. His own image raised its hand, and a half-second later, a shadowy, indistinct arm in the shape behind him also rose. He snatched his hand back down, his breath catching in his throat. It was real. Something was mimicking him. As he stood there frozen, he began to hear it. A soft, shuffling sound on the floor behind him. An extra footstep that was just slightly out of sync with his own movements. That was it. He abandoned the buffer right there in the middle of the hall. He practically ran, his own footsteps now joined by that soft, dragging shuffle from behind him. He didn't look back. He burst through the doors at the end of the hall and ran for the janitor's closet to grab his things. His final task for the night was to clean the bathrooms on that floor. His mind was screaming at him to just leave, to get out, but he didn't want to get fired. He ducked into the men's room, his heart pounding. The bathroom was dead silent. He quickly wiped down the counters, his eyes fixed on the door in the mirror, expecting to see it swing open. He moved to the sinks. He cleaned one, then the second. As he reached for the third, the handle on the faucet next to him, a heavy, industrial metal handle, turned slowly, deliberately, all by itself. A gush of cold water poured into the basin. He was out of that room in a second. He didn't clock out. He didn't grab his coat. He ran for the emergency exit, burst out into the cool night air, and never, ever went back. He left behind whatever it was that walked the third-floor hall, the thing that wore the shape of a man but couldn't quite keep up, the patient mimic hiding in the reflection. Our final story takes us to a place that many of us know well, a school. But schools, like all old buildings, have histories. They hold the echoes of all the people who have walked their halls, and sometimes those echoes are darker than others. A young janitor had just started a new job at a large high school. It was a sprawling building, parts of it dating back to the early 1960s. During his first week, his older, more experienced co-workers would tell him stories. They were mostly jokes, ways to haze the new guy. They told him the art room was haunted by a grumpy teacher, or that the gym lights would flicker on their own. He'd laugh it off. Every old building had its ghost stories, but they all spoke differently about the library. "Just be careful in the library," one of the older janitors told him, his voice serious. "There's a story there." The story, as he eventually learned, was a tragic one. Back in 1972, a fire had broken out late one night in the library's back office. Two of the school's beloved janitors, working the night shift together, were caught in the blaze and didn't make it out. The library was eventually rebuilt, but the memory of that night lingered. Staff and even students would sometimes report strange feelings. The scent of smoke when there was no fire, or books falling from shelves for no reason. The new custodian was skeptical. It was a sad story, but that's all it was. For months, his job was normal. The library was just a big, quiet room that smelled of old paper and floor wax. Then came the week of the deep clean. The students were on a short break, and the janitorial staff had to do a top-to-bottom cleaning of the entire school. On his third night, his task was the library. His co-workers were working on a different wing of the building, and for a few hours he was completely alone in the cavernous room. The library at night was a different place. The towering shelves, usually so inviting, now looked like dark canyons, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. The silence was absolute. He put on his headphones, played some music, and got to work, trying to ignore the eerie atmosphere. About an hour in, he took his headphones off to move his cart, and in the sudden silence, he felt it. That classic, unmistakable feeling. The feeling of being watched. He stopped, standing perfectly still in the middle of an aisle of history books. He scanned the massive room. Nothing. Just rows and rows of silent books. He told himself it was just the creepy setting getting to him. He was alone in a supposedly haunted library. Of course he felt spooked. He tried to shake it off and get back to work, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It grew stronger. It felt like there were eyes on him, tracking him as he moved from one section to another. The air grew heavy. and a chill settled over him. He was dusting a high shelf when the feeling changed. It was no longer just the sense of being watched. Now it felt like a presence. It felt like something was in the room with him, and it was getting closer. He described it as feeling a rush, not of wind, but of energy, as if something unseen was barreling down the main aisle towards him from the far end of the library. He was frozen to the spot, his hand gripping a dusty rag. His logical mind was telling him to run, but his body wouldn't respond. He stood there, helpless, bracing for he didn't know what. And then it happened, right next to his left ear. So close he could almost feel it. He heard a sound. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a voice. It was a sharp, distinct, and forceful exhale of breath. A sound full of frustration or exhaustion, like someone sighing heavily right on his shoulder. The sound shattered his paralysis. He dropped the rag, let out a yell, and ran. He didn't stop running until he was out of the library and down the main hall, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. He burst into the wing where his coworkers were, breathless and pale. They saw his face and knew instantly where he had been. One of the old-timers just nodded slowly. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked. He never worked alone in the library again. He finished his shift that night, but always stayed close to the others. He believes that what he heard was the echo of one of those janitors from all those years ago. Perhaps a spirit, forever on its final shift, sighing in exhaustion, forever tied to the place where its life came to a sudden, tragic end. The night is long, and for those who work in it, it holds secrets we can only imagine. The next time you walk into your clean office or school in the morning, take a moment to think of the person who was there in the darkness, making it ready for you. They are the keepers of our quiet places, and sometimes the unwilling witnesses to the mysteries that stir when the rest of the world is asleep. Thank you for listening. If these stories resonated with you, and if you want to honor the quiet bravery of those who work the night shift, please leave a like to show your support. It means the world to us. So to all the night shift workers out there, stay safe, and may your shift always end with a peaceful sunrise.